Hello. Hi, guys. I hope you're enjoying your lunch and you had a chance to get your shop on or stimulate the local economy. I'm just giving you a 2-minute warning that our guest speaker is ready, our lunch speaker. So I will introduce her in a few minutes. If you can make sure you're settled in your seats and ready to listen. So I'm going to introduce our lunchtime speaker. Celeste Haldane is the Chief Commissioner of the BC Treaty Commission, and she's going to be discussing UNDRIP and the implications of UNDRIP, or adopting UNDRIP. And just a side note, the proceedings, so the note takers will be summarizing all of the proceedings, and the PowerPoints and those notes will be posted to the LCAC website. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Celeste Haldane.
Well, I'm glad I can see over the mic. I wanted to acknowledge the unceded territory of the Algonquin, and recognizing that I'm from Musqueam and Metlakatla, Tsimshian, I need to acknowledge the territory and the beautiful territory that I sit on presenting to you today. I also want to thank the organizers for the generous invitation to come and share a few insights and some perspectives from British Columbia when it comes to treaty implementation and treaty negotiations. I also want to recognize the vast leaders that we have in this room, the treaty champions, the treaty nations, elders, and citizens, and particularly the youth that are amongst us. You are our next generation, you're our bright generation, and so I really want to acknowledge our up-and-coming leaders that are here with us today. I'm glad to be here as well as my colleagues from the Treaty Commission, and I wanted to acknowledge Angela's presentation earlier, and thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and experiences as an implementing modern treaty nation. And I'm going to draw and reflect on a little bit of advice that I received from the late Peter Hogg. And so some of the concepts that I'll be discussing and sharing with you today come from some of the advice and the opinions that late Peter Hogg prepared for the Treaty Commission. Those opinions and legal opinions are available on our website, so I wanted to make sure that if you go to our website, you'll be able to access them. We have waived privilege because I do think that the advice that he has provided is really important for everyone to have access to that information, and in our role at the Treaty Commission. Since Canada's inception, Indigenous nations have been championing a nation-to-nation recognition. As once sovereign nations and self-governing nations, we have always known our laws, our ceremonies, decision-making, governance structures, our territories, and our resources. There's no better expression of self-determination than what is achieved through a modern treaty that are fairly negotiated and honorably implemented. Treaties are a means of advancing reconciliation, and I'll use British Columbia, but also across Canada and in the other provinces as well as the territories. And a treaty constitutionally protected is the highest form of self-determination, the highest form of reconciliation in our country. Modern treaties provide Indigenous nations with a way to govern themselves and the ability to identify community priorities based on your community needs. And community priorities are no longer determined and dictated by Indian Act policy and legislation, or programs and service timelines. Now that's self-governance. That is self-determination. And I know I'm preaching to all those that already know this, that are implementing, but this feature of self-determination and self-governance is also articulated in the UN Declaration with the aim and the objective of reconciliation, but most notably with the purpose of freedom. Shaking the shackles of the Indian Act, getting rid of the dead hand of the past, which has been devastating for our people. It's been devastating for our Indigenous nations and our communities. Being free to make your own decisions by implementing a modern treaty is probably the most liberating act of all. Your citizens are very lucky to be in a position not under the Indian Act and to be free to make decisions. And as an Indigenous person, I one day aspire to either have a treaty card, a reconciliation card, or a sovereignty card, and no longer be known as number 55000-72701. Modern treaties are constitutionally protected. They are a sharing of sovereignty. And I want to highlight a portion of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People when it comes to the definition of shared sovereignty. Shared sovereignty, in our view, is a hallmark of the Canadian Federation and a central feature of the three-cornered relations that link Aboriginal governments, provincial governments, within and with the federal government. These governments are sovereign with their respective spheres and hold their powers by virtue of their constitutional status rather than by delegation. Nevertheless, many of their powers are shared in practice and may be exercised by more than one order of government. The only mechanism for shared sovereignty is a modern treaty. A declaration of Aboriginal title does not provide for the sharing of sovereignty, nor do bilateral agreements. And even though agreements and other constructive arrangements are an important way for nations to build capacity and get early access to lands and resources and fiscal resources, they are unfortunately not constitutionally protected. They're short in duration, often with a very narrow focus, and the negotiations aren't as robust as treaty negotiations. They also do not provide for a broad-based governance rights and Indigenous subject matter jurisdiction. They generally are stopgap measures, and they are important to building capacity, but again, they are not constitutionally protected. Another extremely important feature is the sharing of jurisdiction. Modern treaties recognizes concurrent jurisdiction. It doesn't establish it, it outright recognizes it. And the sharing of jurisdiction is another unique feature of modern treaties. It's also an important element when we're looking at the implementation of the UN Declaration. When it comes to self-governance and shared sovereignty, I'm going to rely on what late Peter Hogg stated. Treaties that have been negotiated in the BC Treaty negotiations process, or modern treaties, have significant areas of jurisdiction in which the First Nations law or Treaty Nations laws prevail. These spheres give primary authority to First Nations government and are subject to constitutional protection. He further stated this provides substantial clarity and protection for Treaty Nation self-government. So your distinct governance systems and governments that are constitutionally entrenched through your modern treaties is another important element and feature. I'm going to move to talk about the sharing of prosperity. Another important characteristic of modern treaties, as well as the UN Declaration. The notion of sharing prosperity, and as you all know, economic reconciliation is one aspect of a modern treaty, as our ancestral lands have an inescapable economic component. The sharing of our lands and resources is an important element of reconciliation and building nation to nation to nation relationships. But this sharing is just not for the benefit of one over the other. And I say this because I know, just as you know in this room, that for far too long, our Indigenous communities have been subject to poverty, grappling with severe social issues as a result of the punitive government policies and legislation. And some continue to see no resolve to some of these crippling social issues that we all face. Yet at the same time, we've watched resources leave our territories, and the vast resources leaving our territories without as much of a thought to Indigenous nations. And we all know that Canada is a wealthy, resource-rich country. That's why reconciling prosperity must include the sharing of lands, and I mean the true sharing of lands and our resources. As modern treaty holders, You have clear jurisdiction, and I say when it comes to your lands and resources, the sharing of prosperity is consistent with the UN Declaration. And the concept that we must have fair access to our lands and resources and the ability to make decisions over our lands and resources and have a say in what happens in our territories. Modern treaties provide that new framework for joint decision-making, a framework for co-management, collaboration with government and industry, and other nations on key issues when it comes to managing and overseeing the stewardship of your lands and resources. Your modern treaties go way beyond the concept arising out of case law relating to the Crown's duty to consult. Rather, it means that government has a requirement with the aim of securing consent, or in other words, the Crown must secure free, prior, informed consent. But on a practical note, modern treaties provide a mechanism and a framework for operationalizing the UN Declaration, Section 35, as well as the new legislation that we have in British Columbia. The acronym is DRIPA, but it's the UN Declaration legislation in British Columbia, as well as the federal legislation that is currently being developed. Modern treaties negotiated and concluded through the treaty process and through other processes in Canada are consistent with the UN Declaration, free, prior, informed consent, as conceptualized in a pluralistic and democratic society, consistent with constitutional law. As modern treaty signatories, you are advanced when it comes to implementing the Declaration through your modern treaties. You have been doing the hard work of breathing life into the Declaration through the implementation of your treaties. You're also well positioned to advance the discussions and provide the necessary advice to governments on how to operationalize the Declaration. And I have suggested to the federal government, as they embark on their national legislative process and engagement process, they must engage with modern treaty holders. You have practical skills and advice and the experience to share with government when it comes to implementing the UN Declaration. And I say this, there was a missed opportunity in British Columbia when the UN Declaration legislation was being designed, where they should have included a discussion and sought advice from those 8 modern treaty nations in British Columbia. But I do suspect moving forward that they will be a part of the engagement. They will be able to participate in the action plans being developed. And moving forward, those modern treaty nations will be able to provide the necessary advice to government. And I cannot state enough the importance that modern treaties play when it comes to interpreting and operationalizing the UN Declaration, all the articles of the UN Declaration. Through your negotiations, through implementing your treaties, and coming up with collaborative solutions to issues in common, resulting in new policies such as the co-development of their fiscal policy and the co-development of your new fiscal relationship. All of that ensures that your treaties continue to be living, breathing, meaningful frameworks for change and are a signal to all that modern treaties are, it's all about change. And yes, change can be scary. It's a way to operationalize the UN Declaration, but most importantly, it's the best expression of reconciliation in Canada and a renewed nation-to-nation-to-nation relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. It's a mechanism for change for your citizens, change for your future, change for your future generations, and those that will be coming up behind us. And I will close by saying, as a mother and as a grandmother, we all aspire to leave this place better than when we found it. And I can say you've certainly achieved that and are well on your way to creating brighter, healthy, vibrant, communities that are rich with culture and pride and esteem. And I can say, I am proud to be on part of this journey with you, but really want to acknowledge the hard work of nation building and rebuilding that modern treaty nations have done. So with that, Heichka, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me share some of my perspectives when it comes to the Declaration, as well as some of the work we have together to move our future generations and ensuring that we have bright, vibrant communities moving forward. Thank you.
So Celeste has kindly agreed to take any questions from the floor. We have some questions. You have to lift that mic up there, Dwayne.
Masiti chatagat yuan yaket so yusatini gastant kakastuk yuchat dusauk klinget chanach. Goch nachat siti anyedi ayachat tlek kayadi kadeshitan dachanta ayachat. Dechlisen kwan ayachat. Atlengun chish get yuan. Atlengun chish hat yinadi. Atlengun chish algonquin kwan. Thank everybody here. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question that's maybe not so much just for you, it's for all of us self-governing First Nations here as well. Well, when I first moved to Teslin, it was 1992, and that's before we signed our self-government agreement. Hey. So I saw it as an Indianak band, and I've also seen it progress into a self-governing First Nation, and I've seen how far Teslin has come in those years. But I also know it's no paradise either. That we still got a long ways to go, and government is mainly responsible for that. Teslin had to recently take the government to court for underfunding us from day one. We have this wonderful agreement. My sister here was one of the negotiators for Teslin, and we have this wonderful agreement. But if government doesn't honor it, the spirit and intent of those agreements, then they're not worth the paper they're written on. How do we keep government accountable for when they go against what they've agreed to, when they go against this reconciliation that they're always talking about? Is it reconciliation when they send armed troops into Wet'suwet'en? Is it reconciliation only for those First Nations who agree with them? Everyone else, they'll get the end of a gun. We've signed for self-government agreements. We're still at battle with the government. So how do we keep them accountable? It's nice words that they say to us, but how do we make them live up with their actions? Especially when they do something against one of us, there's an attack on all of us. I'm angry with what's going on in British Columbia right now, and that's not even my First Nation. But they're my people. They're my First Nation people. Recently, a few years ago, the Yukon government was wanting to put a dam on Teslin River, was one of the sites identified as one of the 10 sites in the Yukon. That would have destroyed our salmon. They had the ability within our agreement to expropriate land. So they were within their rights if they wanted to do that. But I told them, go ahead. You want an Oka in the Yukon? Just try it. Because our people will not sit by and let you destroy our salmon and let you destroy our river, even if you have it on paper that you can do this. They backed down a week after that. They took Teslin off the list. They keep on saying it wasn't because of what we were saying. But we need to stand as one voice. What's going on in British Columbia, it might not affect us directly, but it affects us. Because if government's doing that to one First Nation, they're going to do it to you eventually. And they're doing it to us right now. Every time they undermine our agreements, every time they don't fully implement our agreements, every time they try to water down what we agreed to, that's an attack upon us as well. And I'm sure everyone sitting here can give examples of when the government has not lived up to our agreements. When do we hold them accountable? When do we say enough is enough? Because what they're doing there, they're going to do to us eventually. So I just wanted to share my frustration today. It's great we can be in this wonderful hotel, eating this wonderful food, listening to all these wonderful speakers, and hearing all the good things about self-government, because yes, self-government has been good for our people. But we can't sugarcoat things and say that it is where it needs to be right now. And we got to be honest and say that our people are suffering throughout the country as well under the Indian Act. I just wanted to give my sister here a chance to speak as well. Jeesh.
I think Dwayne said everything that there is to say. However, kohanechat yanyeri sha ayechat yeti. Gulchi sitini stikat yuan. Go aya one. Land claims thing. I said thank you for me seeing you. My name is Kohohan. I'm from the Yenyeri clan in Teslin. I have great concerns about what Canada is doing. When we were at the table, I told them I have such a hard time talking to them because when you talk right from your heart, your mouth, you talk straight, it's hard to reach them because they talk out of both sides of their mouth. We're still having a hard time negotiating. We're trying to finish our justice negotiations in Teslin. So it took us, we signed our initial agreement with justice in 2011, and we haven't even finished enforcement. That's only one segment. So government's really dragging their feet. We're quite a big industry in this country. If you look at it, I mean, look at this. We have buildings that take care of our business under the Indian Act still. I don't know what it's going to take for the federal government to take us as self-governing First Nations when they give part of our funding to look after education to Yukon government on behalf of First Nations. Our housing, education, health, you name it, they've got the money. They give it to Yukon government on our behalf. I told them, we're self-governing First Nations here in this country. Why don't you give the funding to us as self-governing First Nation? So those are some of the things that goes through my mind. And I support everything that's been said, that we're walking in two worlds. You know, we have to hold on to the old way and hang on to the new way as well. We were told many years ago that we had to do that. They said there's going to be people coming amongst you and you have to learn their way, but never let your way go, is what the elders told us. There's a big job for us to do while we're implementing our agreement. There's a big healing process that has to happen, you know, that'll help us stand on our feet again. It's not easy, as been said before. It's a big job that we have to do. There's many elders that have supported us. I know in Teslin, being one of the negotiators, we had lots of support from our elders. That's why we are where we are right now as a people. The elders have helped us, but those elders are leaving. Now it's up to us. Because our future is in our hands. What are we going to do to protect that land, to protect the water, the environment, for those grandkids coming behind? I became a great-grandmother in this process. That's always been my concern. Like we talk about, we're doing this work for future generations. We are. And I thank Creator because the elders have stood behind us. I know they have stood behind me to help me get to where I'm at in my life. I thank you for your time. And I'm really concerned about what's going on within Canada when they can take the army or the police to enforce their law on us. I told my son when he was growing up, someday we're going to have to fight the third battle. And it's going to be about our resources, our water, our air, our land, our animals. This is where we're going. Where is it going to end and how is it going to stop? It's good we have land claims, but government doesn't even honor it themselves. The honor of the Crown is always held in question. Kulchish.
I wanted to thank both of you for sharing in a room with those that understand, I would say, the frustrations when it comes to the heavy hand of the Crown. We've all been exposed to those types of issues within our communities for sure, and we're all watching what's happening, particularly in BC. You've got a lot of hotspots. And I do want to acknowledge that treaties have to be honorably implemented. And I think there's a role when we have the discussion moving forward around this National Treaty Commission body. What will that look like? And are they going to be independent? And I think those are some of the questions that when it comes to the implementation, that there needs to be, I would say, probably an independent body that oversees it. So it takes that heavy-handedness out of the conversation, and we should be at a level playing field. And from what I'm hearing, in some circumstances, we're not. And so I wanted to again thank you for sharing your perspectives and your insights with everyone, because I think the more that we share that information in rooms such as this and for other nations that are currently negotiating, I think that will be helpful as well as we move forward on everyone's journey to self-determination through the pathway that they see fit, whether it's through treaties, agreements, or other constructive arrangements. But there's certainly a lot of knowledge in this room, and we just need to be open to sharing and listening. And I think that it'll help our communities as we go through this process of decolonization, because that's truly what it is. And we have a lot of healing to do in some aspects. And I absolutely agree. I mean, there's a lot of our communities that are still grappling with issues, whether you're self-governing or not. It just means that there's a different pathway, and that now, hopefully, through modern treaties and self-governance, that you're able to actually identify your community's priority areas and put the resources and the necessary resources, such as education or health or healing, drawing down the administration of justice, so we can ensure that when we're moving forward in our communities, we're providing what our community visions have articulated. And I am an optimist, and I hold out hope always, because it is about our future generations. But again, I wanted to thank you both and sharing, and I look forward to hopefully connecting. Unfortunately, I'm heading back to Vancouver, but my office and myself, I'm always available to have conversations, as well as we'll have, I believe Angela's here, and I've got 2 other colleagues from the Treaty Commission as well. So with that, Heitsepka.
Thank you, Celeste. That was fantastic. Don't fall down. We have just a few more minutes before we go into our breakout sessions. I'm just going to cover the different breakout sessions, and then you're free to go to those sessions. So the first one, breakout 1A, is teaching our citizens about the treaties. That is going to be chaired by Dana Tisha Tram in the Julian Gagnon Walker room, I believe. Breakout 1B, self-government, is going to be here in this room with Adam Fritz. Breakout C, it's all connected, socioeconomic outcomes and well-being. That's going to be chaired by Daniel Tse Lee. And the Delphos room. The breakout D is implementation organizations, committees, and co-management boards. That's chaired by George Moore in the Krieghoff room. Consultation, design, or guidelines, expectations, and case studies, chaired by Jana Primslow in the Suzor Coat room. And all those rooms are just on the other side of the escalator down the hall. And they start at 1:15, and if you have the next 15 minutes to just wrap up lunch and then head down there, you're encouraged to check out the exhibitors in the room and the artisans outside. So 1:15 to your breakout sessions. Thank you.
All the ones that came before you, they don't matter no more.